The sky hung low over Ash Hollow, smeared with soot-colored clouds that pressed down like a guilty conscience. Jedediah Brooks, reins in hand and silence in his chest, rode slow through the silted trail back to his ranch. The wind carried the dry scent of charred mesquite and something fouler, something human. His mare, Junebug, snorted and stopped short atop the ridge that overlooked the southern flats. That's when he saw it. A wagon. Ablaze. It sat crooked in a gulch, fire licking its sides like it had been waiting all night for someone to notice. Black smoke curled upward, slow and reluctant, as if ashamed of the job it was doing. Jed narrowed his eyes. The wagon bore the faded stencil of a traveling matchmaker, *Frontier Futures, brides for the bold, *a wheel lay twisted beneath it like a broken limb. He heard screaming. Without thought, without prayer, he kicked his heels and descended. He hit the ground running, boots splashing through a shallow creek and crunching up toward the flames. The wood snapped and roared, and through the heat waves, he saw them, figures behind the iron-barred door. 4 of them. Women. Chain-bound. Dresses torn. Skin blistered with soot and fear. One of them locked eyes with him. She was pale beneath the ash, her face round and flushed from the smoke, but her gaze was solid, angry, not pleading. She didn't scream. She simply stared, as if daring him to turn around and pretend he hadn't seen. He didn't. Jed used the butt of his rifle to break the lock, grunting as the iron bent. The door flung open and the women spilled forward in a storm of coughs, cries, and smoke. One collapsed. Another pushed herself to her knees, coughing blood. The third clutched something close, a scorched book? A keepsake? The fourth stood and shoved him back, spitting, "Don't touch me." He didn't. He backed off, let them come out on their own, and scanned for water. He handed them a canteen. 3 of them drank like it was salvation. The one who slapped him, tall, hard-eyed, hair in a sweaty braid, just stood, arms crossed. They stood together like a cornered beast, chained no more, but not yet free. He took off his coat and draped it over the youngest, a girl who couldn't have been more than 19. She was weeping, mouth trembling without sound. Her hands were raw from the shackles. He finally spoke. "I've got a wagon. It's not far. You can ride. Or stay." The tall one, Delilah, she would later tell him, looked him over with a soldier's suspicion. She nodded once, sharp. "We ride." They moved slow through the scrub and silence. The town had tried to forget them. But the prairie, and Jed, could not. By the time they reached Ash Hollow, dusk had melted into a copper twilight. Shadows stretched long and mean. Folks stood on porches and watched. No one helped. No one asked. Jed pulled the reins in front of Widow Crane's shop. The old woman stared at the 4 soot-smeared women clinging to one another on the wagon bench, then at Jed like he'd walked a mule into church. She spat on the steps and said, "They're cursed. Fat witches in wedding rags. Shame you'd bring 'em here, Jed Brooks." He said nothing. The women said nothing either. The youngest girl flinched under their stares, drawing the coat tighter. One of the others, a red-haired woman with wild eyes, began humming something broken and sweet. Jed drove past the saloon, past the general store, past the sheriff's office where Amos Pike peeked out and then closed the curtain. The wheels creaked like old bones. He brought them home. His ranch squatted in the belly of a canyon, ringed with cottonwoods and wind. It had once been loud with life, his wife's laughter, the baby's first cries. But years had washed those sounds away, leaving only the creak of the barn door and the wind in the rafters. Now it stirred again. Not loudly, but deeply. He opened the door to the guest cabin. It was dusty but clean. He lit the lamp and stepped back. "There's blankets. Water pumps out back. I'll bring supper soon." The one who had held the book, the schoolteacher-looking one, dark eyes and steady hands, spoke for the first time. "Why?" Jed paused. "Because no one else did." He left them there with that. That night, the wind howled through the canyon like it mourned something ancient. Jed sat on his porch, sipping lukewarm coffee, listening. They didn't speak. Not loud enough for him to hear. But a lantern flickered in the window, and now and then, the sound of someone sweeping the floor. He rose early. By sunrise, the ranch was different. The barn door stood open. Delilah was feeding the hens, not looking at him, just working, like it was hers to do. The redhead, Ruby, was dancing barefoot in the dust, arms out, spinning in silence. Martha, the schoolteacher, sat with a book and a pen, lips moving with thought. The youngest, Elsie, had tied ribbons to the fence, watching them flutter like prayers. He set a fresh loaf of bread on the porch and went to mend a gate. He said nothing. And they said nothing back. But something was beginning. By week's end, the town was boiling. Sheriff Amos came in person, hat clutched like a boy caught stealing. "Jed, they're sayin' things. Folks are riled. The mayor's callin' a meeting." Jed kept hammering. "Let him meet. They're sayin' you're keepin' them. That it ain't decent. Jed looked up. It wasn't decent when they left them to burn. The sheriff opened his mouth. Then shut it. Just, be careful. That evening, Jed found a note tucked inside a book on his porch. It was from Martha. Ink in clean, slanted letters. Asterisk, you didn't ask our names. That matters. I'm Martha. You already met Delilah, Ruby, and Elsie. We won't be a burden. But we don't aim to disappear either. Asterisk. He smiled for the first time in weeks. But as the sun slid down and shadows returned, he saw them again, figures on the ridge, watching. Widow Crane. Mayor Quincy. A few others. They didn't yell. Didn't charge. Just stood and stared, like buzzards waiting for something to die. Jed watched them back. Inside the cabin, Martha stood by the window, arms crossed. We're not safe yet, are we? Jed shook his head once. No, ma'am. But safe ain't always where folks say it is. The night grew thick with heat. Somewhere in the hills, a coyote cried. In the cabin, the women took turns reading aloud from a tattered novel, asterisk Jane Eyre asterisk Ruby laughed at the wrong places. Elsie whispered the words as they were spoken. Delilah sharpened a whittling knife with quiet hands. And Jed, on the porch, sat in stillness. Not guarding them. Not watching the hills. Just listening. To four women breathing. Alive. Unbroken. And unashamed. By midsummer, the air over Jed Brooks' orchard shimmered with golden heat and the weight of stories unspoken. The four women moved across the ranch like they had always belonged there, each in her own rhythm, shaping the silence into something that no longer stung. Delilah chopped wood before the sun reached its peak, sleeves rolled high, arms corded with muscle that once shielded others from pain. She said little, but she listened hard. When a fence post needed resetting, she was already hauling the beam before Jed noticed it was broken. They never thanked each other with words. They just nodded like soldiers, like people who understood that some kindnesses are heavier than speech. Martha had claimed a corner of Jed's sparse library and converted it into her sanctuary. Books, paper, and the soft scratching of her pen filled the dusk. She began leaving small, folded pages on the table, instructions for herbal salves, sketches of the stars, poems copied from memory. Jed read them all, folding each with care, though he never said so. Ruby had started humming again, then singing. The barn became her chapel. At twilight, she'd twirl across the packed dirt floor, skirts catching the orange light, face tilted skyward like she was dancing with the ghosts of the life she almost had. Jed once caught her mid-spin. She froze. Then curtsied. He tipped his hat. And left her to it. Elsie, bright and solemn, had taken to naming every tree, chicken, and fence post. She braided wildflowers into every corner she could find, humming lullabies only she seemed to remember. One morning, she came to breakfast with her hair full of bees. They didn't sting. Delilah just shook her head, muttering, "She's part honey now." But nothing stayed untouched forever. The town did not forgive. The mayor had kept quiet long enough to be dangerous. Whispers turned to plans. One morning, Sheriff Amos returned, hat in hand again, eyes darker than before. "They're holding a council meeting, Jed. Tonight. On account of indecency. Immorality. The usual rot." Jed poured coffee into a second cup and set it in front of Amos. "You voting?" "I'll be in the back. Watching." "That ain't the same as standing." "I know." That evening, the air went still, thick with the feel of an oncoming storm. Jed told the women what was coming. "We can leave," Martha said evenly. "We've left before." Jed shook his head. "You shouldn't have to." Delilah crossed her arms. "Then we won't." When the mayor and his caravan of judgment rode up the canyon path, they came dressed like they were heading to a funeral. Widow Crane sat tall in a black bonnet, her lips pinched and primed. Behind her, townsfolk clutched signs reading decency, virtue, protect our town. The message wasn't subtle. Jed met them at the gate. "You're harboring shame," the mayor began. "A house of disgrace in plain view of decent men and women." "I'm housing people," Jed replied. "They are not people by our standards." "Then maybe your standards need burying." Gasps fluttered. Delilah appeared behind him, arms folded, the scar on her collarbone visible beneath the open neck of her shirt. "You speak like we ain't got ears." Ruby followed, then Martha, then Elsie, who carried a daisy chain and a small, broken doll she had mended with blue thread. They stood shoulder to shoulder, not behind Jed, but beside him. Widow Crane stepped forward, voice sharp. "You're a fool, Jed Brooks. These women are too much. Too big, too brash, too defiant. They don't belong." Martha looked her square in the eye. "You ever read the good book, Mrs. Crane?" "I have. I don't remember the part where weight kept a soul from grace." The mayor tried again. "It's not personal. It's about image. About the children." Ruby smiled, slow and sad. I wanted children. I wanted a stage, too. But your men saw hips and called it sin. Elsie, quiet until then, stepped forward and held up her daisy crown. I made this for you, ma'am, she said to Widow Crane. The woman blinked, stunned. She took the flowers with trembling hands, and turned away, ashamed. One by one, the crowd began to quiet. Some dropped their signs. Some looked at their boots. No one shouted. Not anymore. The mayor's face twisted with frustration. This isn't over. A town has rules. Jed answered, so does the land. And it don't care how big a woman is if she can ride a storm. They left, slowly, like a parade that had forgotten what it was marching for. For a week, things settled. The air felt cleaner. Even Sheriff Amos sent a nod from his horse as he passed. Jed began planting new apple trees with Delilah's help. Ruby taught Elsie to dance, their laughter drifting through the orchard at dusk. Martha and Jed sat on the porch most nights, not touching, not speaking much, but sharing a silence that didn't hurt anymore. Then came the fire. It started at the far end of the orchard, dry grass igniting beneath a split fence post. The wind carried it fast, and by the time Jed smelled the smoke, it was already racing uphill. He didn't yell. He ran. The women woke fast. Ruby grabbed the horses. Delilah pulled buckets. Martha shoved books into sacks. Elsie screamed once, then began stamping out the flames with her skirt. Jed busted the cabin window and pulled Martha out. Delilah kicked the back door open. Together, they formed a line, passing water from the trough to the orchard, soaking what they could, choking on ash. The fire ate half the grove before it stopped. But it didn't take them. Afterward, they sat in the dirt, lungs heaving, hands blistered. Elsie leaned against Ruby, asleep before the wind cooled. Martha wiped soot from her cheek. That was no accident. No, Jed said, watching the horizon. It wasn't. They didn't speak of it again. But the orchard, blackened and still smoking, became something else. Weeks passed. The fire never returned. One tree had survived untouched, an old twisted apple tree in the heart of the grove. Martha hung wind chimes on it. Delilah hung her knife beside them. Ruby carved her name in the bark. Elsie planted daisies at its base. Jed built a bench under its limbs. The town never came again, not with torches, nor laws, nor judgment. Widow Crane closed her shop and left. The mayor ran unopposed. But no one showed to vote. And so Ash Hollow forgot them again. But travelers began stopping by Jed's ranch. Women mostly. Some bruised. Some lost. All carrying too much. They never stayed long. Just long enough to be seen. Jed and Martha sat on the porch, watching the stars swell. Her hand rested on his, warm and quiet. No declarations. No promises. Just presence. And peace. If you find yourself wandering the canyon one late summer evening, you might hear music through the orchard trees. You might see ribbon and wind chimes and feel something rise up inside you, something soft, but mighty. And if you stop at the red-roofed house, someone will greet you. With coffee. With silence. With grace. Because that's where shame went to die. And where love grew, quiet, fat, and unafraid.